Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Solve My World podcast, where we say to ourselves, if I want to solve the problems of the world, I first need to solve the problems in my world. So today I wanted to talk about mindset, the type of mindset that we need to have to solve the problems in our world. If you tuned in last week, I went over the basic outline of Solve My World. I talked about the purpose of the Solve My World podcast, how we can achieve, how we can solve our problems, and what the Solve My World podcast is, and what form it's going to take in the future as I see it right now. So today I wanted to dive into the how. And there's the 5 different steps for how we can solve our problems. And so that's your mindset, your holistic context, your circles of influence, using the laws of the universe to your advantage, and creating systems. And so the next several episodes, I'm going to go through each one of these and go more in depth on what they mean and some examples of them. So today I'm going to start with mindset. So with mindset, I've got 2 lists. I've got things that we want to become, and then I've got things that we want to stop being. So let's start over here in the becoming list. And as you can see, I've got a list of about a dozen things, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. There's many other attributes that we can have. These are just the ones that I first thought of, and I'm sure I'll add more to the list as I think of more things and refine it more in the future. But as of right now, these are the ones that I thought were important. So it's not a very organized list right now. I just put down all the things that I could think of, like I said. So I'm just going to go through each one and talk about what it means and how it applies to solving the problems in our lives. And then, of course, solving the world's problems. So let's jump right in. So let's start here. The first attribute. First attribute is faithful. And as a little subcategory, I've got the action follows. So being faithful means that you expect something to happen when you do something else. And so, for example, I have faith that if I plant a seed, a plant is going to grow from it. If I don't have faith that the seed's going to grow, I'm never going to plant that seed in the first place. So it's really important that we have faith that when we start working towards a goal, we have faith that there's going to be an outcome that we expect. So let's move on to the next one, aware. Now, being aware is something that I think is one of the most important attributes. Being aware of your surroundings is how you can learn about how the world works around you. One of the other 5 steps to solving your life is to use the law of nature to your advantage. And if you can't properly observe nature or the laws of the universe, you're not going to be able to use them to your advantage. And so being aware of what's going on around you is very important. The next one is being fearless. Fearless, somewhat similar to faithful, I would say. Basically, this just means you have to realize that you're going to take risks in your life. And you need to be fearless when taking those risks, because fear and faith cannot coexist. And if you have fear, you're not going to have faith, and therefore you're not going to be able to put as much effort into it because you're going to be fearful. It doesn't mean that you don't prepare for bad things to possibly happen. It just means that you're not so busy worried about what's what could happen, that you're not focusing on what you can do about it and moving forward. So that's fearless. The next one is honest. This one is very important because it's a good way for you to get social capital as well as the psychological benefits. Our brains like to have what's the word I'm looking for? Our brains do not like cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you say one thing but you do something else, or you believe one thing but you do something else. You're not being honest with yourself or being honest with other people. And it kind of makes your brain hurt almost. And so when you're honest, not only with other people, but with yourself, you eliminate cognitive dissonance, and you can work with your brain instead of trying to work against it. Now, this also takes a little bit of an angle of being honest with yourself about where you are in your life, what your own abilities are, what things you need to change. If you think that your life is perfect and that you're perfect, then you're not going to be able to make any progress. So you need to be honest with yourself and tell yourself what the truth is. You have to recognize your own weaknesses, recognize your own strengths, so that you can find out what areas you need to fix in your own life. And that is one of the most difficult parts, I think, of being honest, is training yourself to not look at yourself in the best light, and always look for ways you can improve, as well as things that you're good at. Because it can go two ways. You can be dishonest with yourself by saying that you're the best person or the smartest person or whatever. But if you're not, then you are deceiving yourself. But it can also go the other way. You can be telling yourself that you're the worst person in the world and that there's nothing redeeming about you, and that's not honest either. And then you're going to get discouraged and fearful. And so you have to be honest with yourself and try and figure out where you actually stand from an objective perspective. So that's honesty. Realistic. This one's very similar to honesty, I think. You need to look at things in their real light. Whether that's a goal you're setting, you need to be realistic about what you can accomplish and what you can't accomplish. If you're not realistic, you're just setting yourself up for failure. The next one is motivated, which I typed motivated. So that's something I need to be honest with myself about, is that I do not always spell words correctly on my mind map. So I'm going to have to change that later. But anyway, being motivated. Motivation is like the energy that you use to get yourself to move forward. It's kind of like the gas. If you're a car, you need gas to start going. If you are motivated enough, you can even go uphill. You can do hard things. Motivation is one of the most important things to change your life, because change is difficult. And we need to be able to motivate ourselves so that we can change the things that are difficult to change. The easiest thing in the world to do is just sit around and do the same thing. Though I should say it's easy in the short term, but in the long term, it'll make your life way harder. But if you are motivated, you can do the hard things first, which will make your life way easier. So that's motivated. Next one is being positive. So you might think that this is a little contradictory from being honest with yourself, because if you're looking at something in a positive light, it might not necessarily be honest. But I would say that it's a little bit different. I think you can be realistic and be positive at the same time. you can, this I think goes again back to faith and being fearless. If you look at yourself and you think to yourself, I am not very good at typing things, spelling them the correct way on my mind map, that's being honest with yourself. But if you say, but I can get better at it and I can improve and be the best spelling person on mind maps there is, and that is a positive attitude where you're still being honest with yourself. And I think being positive leads right into motivation. If you're always negative about everything, it's going to be tough to motivate yourself. And so you need to have a positive attitude, a faithful attitude, a fearless attitude, so that you can get that motivation to get things done. Next one is responsible. This one is very important. Being responsible means taking care of your own problems. When it comes down to it, you have the most influence over your life. And, that's a great thing. It's also a scary thing in a lot of ways. But you have to realize no one wants to solve your problems for you as much as you do, or as you should. When something goes wrong, you need to realize that you're the one that can change it. It might not be your fault that something happened, but it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It just matters who can change it. And you're the one that needs to change it. And so being responsible for your own life, for your own problems, and for those who you have stewardship over, like your family, you need to be responsible for them and not have a dependent mindset, I guess you could say, that you're dependent on someone else to solve your problems. You have to solve your own problems. This is solve my world, not let someone else solve your world for you. So you need to be responsible. The next one is confident. This one is very similar to positive. I think of it pretty much the same way. Just two different ways to say it. You're confident in your abilities. In the honest section, or like I talked about with being honest, you need to recognize not only your weaknesses, but also your strengths. And once you recognize what your strengths are, you need to be confident that you can do something. This is something that I struggle. Well, I guess I don't struggle with it too much anymore, but I've struggled with it a lot in the past, where I'm so worried that I'm going to do it wrong that I will ask someone else how to do it, even though I already know how to do it, just because I wasn't confident in my own knowledge and abilities. And as I've gotten older, I've realized not only does it hurt me because I'm, not confident, but it also is very annoying for those around me because I'm always second guessing myself and, well, how should I do this? And it's just like, well, you know how to do that. Just go do it. And so that's something that I've had to work on, is being more confident in the things that you know that you can do. Just do it. Don't be so worried about failing. Just be confident in your abilities. The next one is open-minded. This is one that I think most people in the world could use a lot of training in. Being open-minded doesn't mean that you give up on your principles, as some people might think. Being open-minded means that you are always willing to listen. That doesn't mean you are always willing to change your beliefs to match whoever is talking. That would be, I don't know, simple-minded or copycat-minded. I don't know. But it's not open-minded. Just means you'll let the information in, but then you decide what you're going to do with it. So if you hear a new idea, you don't immediately just shut it down. You think about it. One practice I like to do is think to myself, how could that be true? And try and, almost like I believed it was true, try and follow that to the end. Try and reasonably work through it. And it's usually a pretty good exercise to keep me from from getting stuck in my beliefs and the way of doing things when I might find a better way to do things. So being open-minded. All right, the next one is being disciplined. Being disciplined is where you will do what you say that you do, whether you say it to someone else or whether you say it to yourself. You have to follow through with what you're going to do. You hear a lot of people, especially around New Year's time, when they create their New Year's resolutions, and they're like, I'm going to lose a bunch of weight, or I'm going to learn this thing, or I'm going to do this thing, or whatever. And what's the joke? After a couple weeks, no one's following them anymore. And that's a lack of discipline on one hand. It's also probably a lack of proper planning and a failure to create proper systems and following the steps that I've outlined in Solve My World 5 steps. But one of those steps is discipline, and that's an important one, because it doesn't do any good if you go through all these steps and you create your system, but then you never follow through with your system. So this kind of goes in line with motivation. It's a lot easier to be disciplined if you're motivated. But some people are extra good at discipline, and even if they're not motivated, they can push their way through. That is not the case with me usually. I find it difficult to be disciplined unless it's something that I'm really motivated about. And it's a struggle for me to do that. So what I've had to do is make sure that I'm always motivated, to help me stay disciplined, as well as working on keeping my discipline levels up. So that is a very important one. All right, driven. Driven is similar in a lot of ways to many of the things we've talked about. I think of it like a horse that has blinders on. They're just looking towards that goal and they just go straight towards it. They're not getting sidetracked and they're not getting off course. They're just focusing on their goal and going for it. And so driven is a very important attribute to have. Not to say that you should close your mind and not be aware of your surroundings, but when you have a goal, you don't let just little things sidetrack you. Sometimes you need to make a readjustment and work on a different goal or something. But if it's just little distractions all the time, that can just kill your productivity. And so you need to be driven and focused on, what am I working on right now? What's the most important thing? And let's go and do it. I don't struggle with this one very much. That's, I think, one of my strengths. You can ask my family and friends, when I am doing something, I'm doing something. And if someone comes in and tries to talk to me or distract me, it's just like, no, I'm working on this. Sometimes I go too far and I'm a little bit rude when I just ignore people and just walk right past them. But when I'm working on something, I stick to it. And you kind of want to have moderation in that, obviously, but that is an important one to have. All right. This one, the last one, I think, is being humble. This one is very similar to being open-minded, very similar to being honest with yourself. Being humble is when you recognize that you are not perfect and that you can make mistakes and you can have bad judgments. You have false beliefs and false ideas, but you don't look at it in a negative way. You're not putting yourself down. You have a strength to that. You realize, I don't know everything, but I can learn. And I think the moment you stop being humble is the moment you stop learning. If I think that I know everything about a certain subject, I'm not going to research that subject anymore. And then I'm not learning anything in that subject anymore, and I'm going to fall behind. And I'm not going to reach my full potential. But if I'm humble and always recognize, that there's more I can learn, then you'll always be able to learn more things. It kind of reminds me of a story of a guy who once was giving a lecture, and he saw this guy sitting on the front row as he was speaking, and this guy on the front row was just writing down notes like crazy as he was writing, as he was speaking. And he was kind of feeling good about himself, like, wow, I've got a lot of really good things that I'm sharing. This guy is just loving this. And the guy was just engaged, just watching, just hanging on to every word and writing down like crazy. And so he was feeling pretty good about himself. And then he later on, he sees that same man when he saw a little kid that was kind of giving a little lecture, just a little 2-minute thing or whatever. And the kid was sitting there talking about a subject, and he saw that same guy sitting on the front row, and he was watching the kid with just as much excitement and eagerness as he had watched him. And he's writing down notes like crazy for that little kid as well. And he kind of smiled to himself and realized, it's not that he was such a good speaker, but he realized that man was a very humble guy and realized he can learn something from everyone. Even that little kid giving a little 2-minute lecture, he could still learn things. And I think that's really important. I try to think to myself that every single person that I see, there's something that they know that I don't. There's something that I can learn from them. And that's very important to think about, so that we can look for those opportunities. What can I learn from this person? Instead of arrogantly thinking, well, I'm smarter than them, or I know more about these subjects, which must mean that I know more about every subject. And I think that's an attitude that people often take. And we need to realize we can all learn something from everyone else. And the way that we recognize that is by being humble. All right, so that's all the positive attributes. Now let's talk about a few of these negative attributes that we want to get rid of. Let's jump in here to scarcity-minded. Being scarcity-minded means that you think that there's only so much to go around. There's one piece of pie, and if I get a slice, then that means you get one less slice. For you to win, I have to lose. There's no win-wins. There's just either I win or you lose. Everything's a competition. And I think the reason why you need to get rid of this mindset is it just puts you in a negative mode whenever you're working with other people. Solving the world, solving our own personal world as well as the world at large, requires us to interact with other people. And if we think of every conversation as a competition where the best man wins, then we are never going to get anywhere. Plus, we're always going to have this fearful mindset instead of being optimistic and positive about how much there is in the world. You're thinking how little there is in the world and how can you get a piece of it. When you realize that when two people come together and work on something, it's not like 1 + 1 = 2. It's like 1 + 1 = 5. There's synergies in there that creates more abundance for everyone. So the more we work together, the more is created. And it's not there's one slice of pie. There's not one pie. There's a whole pie factory, and the more people that work in it, the faster we can create more pies. So instead of focusing on trying to get your slice of the pie, let's focus on making more pies. All right, the next one is dependent. So this one's kind of the opposite to the being responsible. If you're dependent on anything, then you are basically a slave to that thing, to whatever extent. If you are dependent on the government to get your paycheck, then you are in some ways a slave to that system because you have to do exactly what that system says you have to do. as well as if you're dependent on a person, if that person goes away, suddenly you're left down the dust, or if they decide that you need to do other things. There's a whole lot of things that could go wrong. So you want to be responsible for your own things. You don't want to be dependent on other things, other people. You want to try and take responsibility for your own life. All right, the next one is being hopeless. Again, this one's kind of the opposite to like being fearful or being fearless and being faithful. Hopeless is when you just don't think that there's any hope. You're not going to be able to get motivated. You're not going to be able to be disciplined. You're not going to be able to solve anything if you're sitting there glumly, woe is me, there's no happiness in this world. You've got to get rid of that hopeless attitude. You've got to focus on what you can do and start working towards there. And this is one, it's kind of easy for me to say because it's not naturally one of my traits. Naturally, I'm a very hopeful person. I like to I'm an optimist. Definitely. I think as I've gotten older, I've tried to temper that with being a realistic optimist. But I think that that's very important. Is if you have to choose between being a pessimist and an optimist, it's probably better to be an optimist, though you want to be honest with yourself and realistic. But either way, you don't want to be hopeless. All right, the next one is negative. Now, as you might guess, this is the opposite of positive. So having a negative attitude is where nothing goes right. Everything that happens, there's a pessimistic way of looking at it. Even if something goes right for you, the negative person is thinking, well, that'll never happen again, or they finally get something they want and they're just like, well, what if I lose it? Everything is just a negative attitude, and they're just fearful, they're hopeless, and we all kind of get this attitude at some times, but we need to try and flip that from a negative to a positive attitude and try to actually accomplish something instead of just complaining all the time. I've heard before that complaining about things is much easier than not complaining about things. And that hit me hard because that's something that I thought that I was very good at, was complaining about things. Finding the negative in things, sarcastically usually, is something that I am very adept at. But then I realized, that's not even something that's very difficult. The real skill is how do you look at something in a positive light and look for an actual solution. You want to be realistic while you're being positive, but being positive, not negative. All right, so the next one is being a procrastinator. We want to stop being a procrastinator. Procrastinator is someone that puts things off. They don't ever want to. They don't ever get around to doing the most important things. So I should say, because there's two different kind of procrastinators in the world. There's the lazy procrastinator, who they're the person that when they think of something hard, when they think that something's going to be hard, they just don't do it, and they just sit around and don't do anything because they get so worried about this thing that they need to do that they just shut their brain down and just don't do anything. So not only are you not working on the thing that's most important, you're not working on anything, and you're just sitting around wasting time. And then the second kind of procrastinator is the workaholic. They're the person that they know that there's something really important they need to do, but they just can't quite get themselves to do it. And so they start working on anything else. They work on other things, anything they can find, whatever's in front of them. They start working on things, and and they can justify it like, well, I'm always working. I'm at least I'm getting things done. But if we honestly look at a potential to-do list of things that you could do in your life, it's so big you're never going to be able to do all those things. And so that's why we need to prioritize what we need to do and focus on the most important things. So even if you feel like, well, at least I'm getting things done, if you're not doing the right things at the right time, it's still wasting your time and you're still procrastinating the big things. And I could probably do a whole show on procrastination because it is something that I've struggled with my whole life. I'm tend to be more of the lazy procrastinator where I will just not do anything, but I do have the workaholic tendency on occasion. That's kind of what I did today when I was procrastinating doing this podcast episode. Is I had to go outside and feed the animals and mow the lawn. So I did that, and then I found several other projects I could work on while I was out there. I made a new pen for our new baby duck. I went and played with our dog for a while. I went and messed around with the chicken coop, and I can't think of anything else, but I went and did move the sprinkler lines. I just was doing anything I could, just working on those things, because in the back of my mind, I was kind of procrastinating coming in and recording this episode, which is funny because I really enjoy recording this episode. It's just, since I know it's important, the procrastination part of me says that I need to put it off because I'm not ready yet. So I'll just give a few tips maybe. This isn't supposed to be like a tip show necessarily, but anyway, I'm going to say a few anyway. So a couple things I've found are very helpful is the most important, I think, is making sure that it really is the most important thing. Because if it's something that's not really that important, then just don't worry about it and stop procrastinating, and you don't even have to procrastinate it because you don't have to do it anymore. But then if it is something you need to do, I like to try and break it down into the smallest possible step, because usually the hardest thing is just getting started. So for example, when I'm recording this podcast, I will say to myself, well, I'll just get on my mind map and create the slideshow that I'm going to do. And then once I'm done with that, then that's it, no promises. So I start doing that. And usually by the time I make the slideshow, I've gotten myself motivated enough that I'm just like, all right, let's record. Here we go. And I just do it. And sometimes this hasn't happened yet, but with other tasks I've done, sometimes you do that first little task and you're like, no, I don't really feel like doing it again. So then what I'll do is, okay, well, if I don't want to keep doing it, what's the next smallest task I can do next time? And then I'll take a break for a while. And the next time I go and I do that one small task. So trying to break it down into as smallest task as possible so you can just get started on one little thing. And then next time start on one more little thing, and then one more little thing. And eventually you're just going to be done. And that's probably been the biggest thing that's helped me. So anyway, there's one little tip for stopping being a procrastinator. All right, the next one, and I think the last one, is being blameful. Being blameful kind of goes along with being dependent. It's that same type of mindset where you're not taking responsibility for your actions or for your situation. There's a few different kinds of ways to be blameful. The first one is where someone causes a situation that makes your life unpleasant in some way. And you rightfully can blame it on them. It's their fault that this happened. And whatever the reason, as soon as you start blaming them, you're shifting the responsibility to someone else. Now, I'm not saying that it's not their fault, because it is their fault. But like I've said before, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It just matters how can you accomplish your goals. And if you're going to sit there and say, well, so and so did this to me, so now I can't accomplish my goals, well, then what kind of a life are you going to live? You're just going to stay in that same spot, just being angry at that person for the rest of your life. So you need to do whatever it takes, whether it's forgiving, forgetting, or just moving on, to just get past it, stop blaming, and start getting something done. And then the other type of person is the person that doesn't want to do anything and they blame their failures on other people. So, like the people that sit around all day watching TV, and then they get mad at the rich people or the immigrants or the poor people or the middle class people or the blacks or the whites. They find someone to blame for why their life is terrible. And I think this type is just as bad, if not worse, than the first way of being blameful. And again, all it does is just shifts responsibility. You're just easing your own conscience, because you know what the reality is that you are the one that needs to get something done, and you need to fix the problems in your own life. But you don't want to do that because you're too lazy, and so you blame it on other people, and you put that off on them. So now your conscience is eased, and you can relax and not do any work. And not only is that lying to yourself, it's not being honest. It stunts your growth. You're never going to get anywhere by just blaming people for your own problems and your own laziness. So whether it's justified blame or unjustified blame, either way, it doesn't matter. You can't dwell on it. You've got to move on. You've got to take responsibility from where you're at, and you've got to figure out, what are my goals, follow the 5 steps, and accomplish your goals. All right, so I guess with that is all of the different attributes. I know it was kind of quick on each one of these, but I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit from it. And in the future, we will have plenty of time to talk more about each one of these, how to make these attributes into your life, include them into your life, how to get rid of the bad things, and then how they actually apply to the whole system. So I think next time we will talk about holistic context, what that means, and so it should be a good one. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this. Focus on your mindset, focus on becoming a better person, getting your head in the right place so that you can start moving your life in the right direction. So with that, this has been another episode of the Solve My World podcast, and I will see you next time.